Hello guys and welcome back to another video, and today we're looking at a scenario where all the regions of Asia go to war. So now I am planning a much larger video where I have all the regions of the world go to, well, every single country in the world. I've done all the regions of the world and every region in Europe, so why not do it for Asia next? So here for regions, we have Russia and the Caucasus, the Middle East, Central Asia, the Indian subcontinent, East Asia, and Southeast Asia. See, just the basic things. The Caucasus, I could have put them with Middle East or with Russia, but since I didn't want to leave Russia literally just them, I gave them the Caucasus Mountains. As for Central Asia, well, I could have put Afghanistan in the Indian subcontinent, but India, Pakistan, and Bangladesh together is already quite strong, and Central Asia is not. So I thought it might be better to give Central Asia the help. As for the strongest currently, I'd probably put East Asia first, followed up by the Indian subcontinent. And then I'd say it's pretty close. Russia's decently strong, Middle East and Southeast Asia. And Central Asia is definitely last. But your position on this map will definitely have a large influence on how you do. As Central Asia, despite already being probably the weakest of the regions here, is also right in the middle where everyone's going to attack them at once. So, yeah, let's get started with that. For the color I'm going to use for orange, it's just lighter colors. So, the Indian subcontinent is quickly pushing into Afghanistan and out into Central Asia. Meanwhile, the Middle East just practically does the exact same. Actually, that doesn't look yellowish enough. Oh my god, come on. Give me a nice yellow color. There we go. So the Middle East is going to begin to push into Central Asia, taking over most of Turkmenistan and Uzbekistan, along with a bit of southern Kazakhstan. As for the red team, well, they're going to do just about the same thing. Start to push into Central Asia. They're going to get northern Tajikistan and most of Kyrgyzstan, along with a small bit of land out of Uzbekistan and a fair amount out of Kazakhstan. Our last contender here is going to be Russia, who is just going to get whatever's left of Kazakhstan. See, I didn't even map that out, didn't even include other things, because that's just like, for sure, Central Asia would be absolutely screwed here. As for the Middle East, well, when it comes to other campaigns they're going to try and push into the Caucasus. That's going to go decently well, and they're going to try and push into it. Gotta set that down. They're going to try and push into India. Just gonna go less well. In fact, India and, well, mostly Pakistan right now is gonna manage to push them back and completely out of Pakistani lands, whilst also beginning to push into Afghanistan and out into Iran. Over here, China is just gonna begin a few major attacks. One in the jungles of Southeast Asia, completely useless, but they meet no resistance, so they don't know why not. And one down here in Russia, which is much more significant, as this is Russia's really only important land in the east, which means it's where all their bases are, with Vladivostok gone, along with the island of Sakhalin, and parts of Siberia that Japan takes over. This war really won't be going on for much longer. Russia has lost most of their bases over here in the east, and the rest is soon after conquered by China. Over on the Mongolian border, it is very slow. Nobody really wants to send their army here, but East Asia will be making some progress. Down here in Southeast Asia, surprisingly, the Indian and Chinese militaries are working together to crush them, as India fully capitulates Myanmar and begins to push down to Thailand and further into Southeast Asia. China decides that India cannot be allowed to own all this, as it would make them too powerful, and both sides kind of just focus all of their attention, everything they have, on trying to come out on top in Southeast Asia. The main fight here is going to be between India and China, at least if you ask me. After splitting that, the borders are readjusted a bit as both sides are pushing back and forth. China regains a bit of the Thai and Cambodian coast, whilst India takes a bit of the Myanmarese jungle? Something like that. As for Russia, well, they haven't had to deal with Southeast Asia or any powerful neighbors. Well, they have all the powerful neighbors, But they're mainly focusing on Central Asia. Nobody's defending it too hard, and since Russia is definitely not in the strongest of positions here, they see it as a good way to assert their influence. They start to push back the Chinese, who are distracted in Southeast Asia specifically, and just generally start to take back a lot of lost lands. Once again, Chinese and Indians are fighting hard in Southeast Asia, allowing all other sides to grab land elsewhere. Russia even manages to push up to the border with China and start a small offensive into the country. Down here with India, they also meet up with the country and begin to plan an attack. Soon after, they see an opportunity for this attack, as the Middle East has also seen this amazing opportunity that's formed up, with China and India absolutely fighting it out. They decide that this is the perfect time to take some land of their own. So they start once again to push into Pakistan, but mainly into Afghanistan. With India and China finally realizing that if they want to keep fighting for Southeast Asia, they'd lose all of Central Asia, possibly even some of their homelands, they decide to slow down the fighting over there, and China refocuses their main forces into eastern Russia. Why? Well, simply for resources. China has a massive population and also a very large industry. Those factories need coal, the people need a ton of resources, and with the Middle East too far away, they decide that Siberia may not be the perfect option, but it's their only option left. They also decide to send over at least a few army groups to beat back the Russians and retake certain lands in Central Asia, not even because they want it, just simply because they want to further secure their own, safety, and taking a bit of buffer land can never hurt. They also begin a few smaller invasions down into India, that's probably going to take a while, but eventually they are hoping to come out fully on top and not have to share the victory with anyone. With India being their main competitor, of course, that is who they are mainly trying to beat back. As for India itself, it decides, whoa, Middle East pushing into my land? Not cool. And they send in almost their entire army to absolutely crush the Middle East in this region. How does this go? Decently well. They capture a lot of southeastern Iran and hurt the Middle East in the process. The Middle East is now cozying themselves up to the Caucasus Mountains, but they push up a bit further until they are firmly along those mountains and have captured all of Armenia, Azerbaijan, and most of Georgia. From there, they once again start to push into Central Asia, as since they have nowhere else to go, they can focus all of their attention here. They have oceans all along their western side, and when it comes to navy, it is pretty blocked off. And with the Caucasus Mountain front being completely blocked off by mountains, they really only have one place to focus, and that is the east. India does not have that luxury, and neither does Russia. Although Russia at this point, with China furthering their advance into Siberia, has completely given up on that land. The Chinese might would eventually overwhelm them, even if they do try and fight in the cold Siberian weather. And it wouldn't just be the invading army that would have trouble pushing into cold wasteland. It's everybody. So with the Chinese losing hundreds of thousands of men to the cold alone, whilst attempting to keep themselves supplied, the Russians lose a couple tens of thousands of men. Considered a victory or a loss for China, but they do it. And it happens. Meanwhile, the Indians are starting to push back into Afghanistan and Central Asia, deciding that they need progress somewhere and that this is the easiest place to get it. They also need some morale for their country, and what better way to do that than to beat up the weaker power. So they make a landing on Sumatra and capture the entire island and surrounding areas. The blue team will defend Java with their life, but India has managed to capture the slightly less important island of Java. As for up here in northern India, well, they will not accept any Chinese aggression on their doorstep, so they will completely push out China and even start a few of their own advances into China. Of course, same as the Chinese advances. These are very small. These two countries are both defending their borders vigorously. Like, it is absolutely stacked up. Like, imagine the DMZ and then 10 times more, but you're actually trying to get through it. It is bad. So yeah, probably in that campaign about 1 million Indians died for a bit of Chinese land. That probably doesn't even have 1 million people in it. As for Central Asia, with India redirecting its attention, they were able to fully direct their attention on the Eastern Front, so they pushed back the Indians quite significantly once again. They are making good progress and redirect a lot of units to Central Asia. With a lot of this land being reclaimed, India decides, okay, you know what? We took this land like 3 times, and we really don't need it. Let's retreat out of Central Asia. So they do that. The Middle East is very happy about this Indian decision, as is practically everyone, as it's a free land grab. Maybe not the most important land, but it is free, and who doesn't like free things? Switzerland can go to Russia. As for the Indian-Chinese border, well, that's a stalemate, and China's still just doing their best to push into eastern Russia. Once again, just endless fighting for small bits of completely useless land. And hundreds of thousands of Chinese dead for a couple tens of thousands of Russians dead. Russia is putting up a stronger and stronger force, though, as they get closer to the more populated regions, although the Chinese military is still coming out significantly on top. Who's going to be the next to collapse here? Well, I think it's pretty obvious, isn't it? Southeast Asia has just been in their little bubble this entire time, but with the joint Japanese-Chinese invasion attacking the Philippines and the island of Borneo, along with this island right here that has a weird name that I can never remember, and if it isn't that one, then maybe it doesn't have a weird name. I don't know, but I can't remember it, and they also make a landing on the island of New Guinea. With this massive Chinese advance, the Indians decide, hey, we have to do something too. So they send a lot to capture the island of Java. And with that coming out as victory, the Indonesians surrender, splitting the island of Borneo between China and India. Who's going to come out on top there? Well, we'll see in a minute. From here, there are now 4, regions left on this map. East Asia, Russia and the Caucasus, the Middle East, and the Indian subcontinent. At this point, China has definitely gained a lot from Siberia, but they've also taken huge casualties and massive hindrances to everything they have. Their economy is in shambles. Everyone's economy is in shambles without Africa and Europe and the US, just the Americas in general. This world would be a lot worse than ours already is. But hey, this is a war. Nobody cares about their people's lives. So China is going to continue to send many, many Chinese to lose their life in Siberia and Central Asia. And Russia's going to say, okay, you may have just taken a ton more land, but I killed 10 times as many of you as you killed of me. And normally Russia has the opposite of that. Normally they're the ones throwing bodies around. But in this case, that is what the Chinese are doing. As for the Indians, they are going to use similar tactics, not in Central Asia because they don't like Central Asia, but over here in Iran. They're going to once again push into the south and try and get to that sweet, sweet Persian Gulf oil. They manage to get to a bit of it until the Middle East eventually stops them, as their oil is what gives them an advantage. Obviously, nobody wants to trade with each other here, but the Middle East has a good portion of the entire oil supply in this world. As for Russia, well, they're struggling, to say the least. The Middle East is pushing into Central Asia very, very rapidly, and the Caucasus Mountain front looks like it may soon crack, not in the Russians' favor, more so completely against them. with the Middle East even now pushing into some very important, well, not important at all, but some core territory for Russia. The Russian people are getting very demoralized. They had already just come out of a war with Ukraine, who doesn't exist anymore, which means they lost a lot for absolutely nothing. And now they're losing another war that it just does not seem like they can win. Maybe casualties are a bit of a morale boost, as they have taken much less casualties than the Chinese. But in the end, the Russians will be the next to surrender. That is thanks to the Middle East, who just pushed into all of southern Russia. They are now very quickly pushing up, and the Chinese are like, hey, I was pushing into random Siberian land, and the Middle East joins in so late and still gets a bunch of the important land. So China decides, you know what? That's not going to happen. And they decide to send in their own absolutely massive force to try and take out Russia, which goes quite well. Sadly for them, the Middle East is much closer to the heart of Russia, which isn't where the heart should be, but it's where most of the Russian population and industry is. So whilst the Chinese are taking a bunch of random land, the Russians surrender to the Middle East, hoping that that oil money can help their people instead of the Chinese using them as body shields. Honestly, probably the better choice. Neither one was good, probably the better choice. With this massive expansion for the Middle East, they now focus a lot more of their energy on India and push them out of the Persian oil fields. From there, they are exhausted, so they're going to stop doing anything for a little while. But guess who else is exhausted? The Chinese. They just sent everything they had at Russia and did not make it to the heart. They were stopped at the Urals before they could get all of that very, very important Russian land. And they are very pissed about that. So pissed, they're going to dedicate even more resources to try and take it. And they're going to be stopped. Then they're going to push towards the Caspian Sea. And they're going to be stopped. Then they're going to try and pull off a northern encirclement. And they're going to be stopped. They're then going to push towards this lake right here. And that's going to go pretty well. But 1 out of 4 of your campaigns that goes well is not good. That's only 25% of it. And China is more than pissed about that. So they say, okay, you know what? If these campaigns so far away from home aren't working, we'll take away some divisions from the front line and bring them closer to home. What can get closer than Southeast Asia, where they capture Bangkok and break the stalemate by encircling Indian divisions and pushing them all the way back up to Myanmar? China sees this as a huge win. India sees this as China just losing a bunch more men. And at this point, the death count's already probably in the tens of millions, especially between India and China, who are both willing to throw away men at each other just to try and win. It's not good, especially India's side. I mean, with Bangladesh, Pakistan, and India on one side, they have infinite manpower, absolutely infinite manpower. I mean, even just Bangladesh and Pakistan together would already be the 3rd most populous country, and India is the 1st. So that combined would be absolutely insane amount of manpower. As for the Indians, well, they're getting pushed out almost everywhere. Where are the Indians? They're over here in China. Tibet does not want to be a part of China, and they're basically telling the Indians, hey, come on in. So these mountains, nobody can be in those mountains, so it was just empty this entire time. And eventually the Indians, they didn't really send in troops, they sent in propagandists, and they got the Tibetans on their side. And when you have the people who live in the mountains on your side, well, just ask the US what happens when they're against you, and now you can ask India what happens when they're on your side. With this, a period known as the Great Stalemate will begin. As down here in Southeast Asia, China takes over the rest of the mainland and the island of Borneo, but the Indians are holding everywhere else. Over here on the continent, nothing is happening. And the Great Stalemate lasts many, many years, with hundreds of thousands, millions dying for slight land changes that you can't even see on the map. What's going to break the stalemate? You guessed it, the Chinese. the Chinese are still pretty pissed about Russia, and after cleaning up Southeast Asia a bit, they decide why not give it one more shot. So they start both attacks again. They meet up with the Caspian, and they pull off the Great Northern Encirclement, which is not that great and does not have that many Middle Eastern divisions. But China's pretty happy with themselves, so they decide to keep going. They push around the Caspian, and they push further and further into Russia, attempting to capture Moscow. They do so successfully, and then China finally realizes something. This entire time, they'd been wasting manpower, and you know what? They still have like 1 billion and almost a half people left. They have not felt it. But when you send people running at them, you need to give those people guns. And China, without the rest of the world trading with them, doesn't have enough resources or enough money to keep giving people these guns. So it will not be manpower that affects China, but they're simply not going to have any guns, and sending your people running at people with guns is not a good idea, something China will soon find out. So after looking like they have already won, like they have complete dominance, China is going to begin to fall apart, especially over here in Western Russia, where they are very, 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 very far away from the, I guess, core Chinese lands, which are over here. When you're that far away, it is very difficult to get resources. Of course, Japan and South Korea are helping with this, but they still have guns because they didn't send millions of men at the enemy with trashy guns. Even trashy guns are better than no guns, and China will soon find this out. By overextending themselves and overusing equipment, with nobody to lend lease more from, they are getting pushed back at a very, very rapid rate. They will obviously not capitulate to this. China's still going to fight to the absolute death. But they are pushed out severely in Russia. And much of the progress they had originally made is set back completely. Over here in India, similar story. They don't have any guns here either. So India gets to have a bit of fun pushing into Chinese lands, especially over here in Xinjiang, where once again they use propaganda and just the people not wanting to be under China against the Chinese. Soon starts the second great stalemate, as the Middle East and India basically split what's left of Central Asia, kicking out the Chinese, whilst the Chinese are holding out on all fronts. They realize their mistake, and they have been working on fixing it. They do manage to do so, and now starts the second great stalemate. Another 10 years or so pass where nothing happens, and India and the Middle East and China are all getting pretty worn out. So as this video gets longer and longer, I think I'm going to end it here. I might save it, make a part 2. Currently, China's worn out. Japan and South Korea are providing most of the arms that they had in stockpile. As China, if you didn't know, their economy is all exports and imports. They have manpower and resources, but they kind of wasted all that in Siberia. The Middle East, they're still going. They have oil. You know what? They'll be slow, but they'll come out. They'll come out winning. In India, they have similar tactics to Russia, just throw men at the enemy, except they just didn't waste everything they had in Siberia. That's about the only difference. With that, I do hope you enjoyed this video, and I will see you all next time. Bye.